Motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Support.
Motion by Scott, supported by Tyler to approve the minutes for the September 1 meeting. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Next item is general public comment. This is an opportunity to speak to non-agenda items. Now, on tonight's agenda, we're looking at the Cambridge Grove project, as well as Jason Ridge. So if you have comments on something other than those, otherwise there'll be time in both of those cases where we'll have an opportunity for comment. But if you want to talk about anything else, this is an opportunity to do so. Okay, seeing none, we'll move right into the agenda items. Case number 21-010, it's a public hearing, final area site plan review on the Cambridge Grove condominium, and we'll move to City Planner Tricia Anderson to introduce the project.
Thanks, Terry. So tonight we have Cambridge Grove Phase 3. And this property, the parent parcel for this phase of the site condominium development is located at 1792 Kennewa Avenue Northwest. And the size of this piece is 55.39 acres. That's the parent parcel. And the zoning district is RPUD 1. Future land use designation is residential growth, 2 to 4 units per acre. And the general location of the site is at Kennewa Avenue and Gordonshire Drive, south of Kennewa Avenue and Richmond Street intersection. And tonight we have Paul Henderson of Roosien and Associates and the developer Ken VerWoert here with us tonight. So the action requested by the Planning Commission for this item is to review the final area site plan for the third phase of the Cambridge Grove site condominium development, units 48 through 72, and to provide a recommendation to the City Commission for the approval, denial, or tabling of this phase of the development. This is different from what's in my staff report. I didn't realize that City Commission also does the approval, the final approval of the site condominium. So I just wanted to make it clear that tonight the Planning Commission is making a recommendation. So just a little bit of history with this development. This was obviously before my time. Phase 1 was 17 units, and that was reviewed between 2005 and 2006, and it was 17 units. And then instead of moving on to Phase 2, they did a Phase 1A in 2015, which consisted of 10 units. And then Phase 2 in 2017, they added an additional 15 units. And then in this phase, they are proposing 25 units. So I've already mentioned the correction to the content in my staff report. So the City Commission does need to review the site condo plan. And Planning Commission makes a recommendation. So this is the overall PUD. And the area shaded in pink here is Phase 3. And some of the improvements that are proposed as part of this phase of the development include sidewalks along the frontage of each lot, street lights, street trees as required by ordinance, utilities, a 9.79 acre walking path, or I'm sorry, nature park with a mowed walking path back in these regulated wetlands here. The developer also added a conservation easement along the edge of the undisturbed wetland areas. That's subject to Eagle review. And then there's also connections between open space areas and pedestrian pathways. And they've also added some evergreen trees here in Cambridge Park, which is one of the open space areas. So just getting into some of the comments that I had in my staff report regarding this phase. The grading plan includes an MBO table, which we require. And then per ordinance, we have the design engineer certify that the grading has been completed in accordance with the approved plan. And then when building permit applications come in, what I do is when I do the review for those applications, I check to make sure that the unit type is being constructed in the way that it was proposed in the MBO table, minimum building opening, and that the elevation matches also what's in that table. And it's been working out pretty good, and we've been asking developers for a set of grading sheets for each individual lot. And so we'll be asking for that as a condition of approval. And one thing I noticed for this phase was that no standard basements are proposed. And I thought that was kind of nice because standard basements, it seems like, are in a lot of these MBO tables. And then when it comes time to start selling lots and selling houses, they have customers that are like, well, I don't want a standard basement. I mean, who has a standard basement anymore? Then you got to put in an egress window. So this phase of the development doesn't propose any standard basements, but it's all based on that minimum building opening and that minimum height above the curb at the road. So another thing that I noticed on the plan was that units 66 through 68 have some challenging building envelopes. And so this is another thing that's going to come up when building permits are applied for. Those might look like attractive lots because there's a lot of wooded vegetation there, a lot of natural areas, but the building envelope is quite small. So it's hard when we see lots like this, and we don't want to recommend approval for lots that would need a variance as part of being able to obtain a building permit. So, and then there was a note in the general notes that indicated that front yard setbacks shall be 35 feet, except for some shall be 30 feet. And so we'd like to have Paul kind of clarify which lots those would be that are eligible for the 30-foot front yard setback, and obviously that would be a PUD benefit. And so the development itself, when the PASP was approved a few years ago, there was a condition associated with the preliminary area site plan that indicates that any future phase of the project must be predicated on a renewed traffic study which analyzes trip generation, levels of service, and conflict points proximal to the project, ADA accessible sidewalk ramps to be installed during road construction. There's some other areas that that we want to pay attention to when adding a lot of traffic to the road. So this particular phase has 25 units, which is adding, several, 10 trips per day per home. But the cumulative effect of all of the units within the development up to this point, because I don't know if there was a traffic study for phase 2, but when we had site plan review committee, we noticed that was a condition of PASP approval, may have gotten missed during phase 2 or phase 1A. And so we said, you know what, it's probably going to be a good idea to have this traffic impact analysis done to see what might be warranted in terms of off-site improvements. So Scott's going to elaborate on that a lot more, and I'm sure the developer and his engineer will have more comments and questions related to that. But the traffic study, in a nutshell, did, in the executive summary, note that there would be some impacts on surrounding roads and intersections. And I guess it's the geometry of the Richmond and Wilson intersection that really needs improvement to keep traffic flow going. But again, I'm going to let Scott handle all that stuff. And then, you know, if we get to the point where the city does want to require these off-site improvements, we would ask that the developer work with the city manager's office to work on a development agreement so that we can get any shared costs in writing and recorded with the land. A couple of things with phase 2 that we noticed were not completed, mainly having to do with some of these access areas. And this plan shows private easement for ingress egress between units 29 and 30 to the open space owned by the association. I feel like I saw that would be paved in another plan. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But this one over here shows a 10-foot wide gravel access drive. Either way, we don't believe that either of these pathways have been constructed. And right now, a building permit is out for unit 29. And I've indicated as a condition of zoning approval that that pathway be constructed, whether it's paved or not paved, so that the folks from this side of the development can access this Cambridge Park. And originally, when we first met, you know, I think it was the desire for this Cambridge Park to just be a mowed grass field. But as we've been seeing a lot of these residential developments come through recently, you know, we're taking note of the importance of some of these active and passive recreational amenities. And so if it's on the plan, we want to make sure that it gets built. So this is grass recreational field. I'm not really sure if that, you know, because there's an outline of this rectangle here. I'm not sure if that's a soccer field or just a general sport field or what it will be. But if there's any other amenities proposed for this park, then they should be added to the plan and obviously to the master deed documents indicating must be built. So all of this to say that my recommendation is for the Planning Commission to forward a favorable recommendation tonight to the City Commission for the approval of the final area site plan and for Phase 3 of the Cambridge Grove site condominium project consisting of units 48 through 72 located at 1792 Kanawha Avenue and in accordance with the latest plan revision dated August 20, 2021. Subject to the 9 conditions listed in the planning director's report, which whoever makes the motion should read into the record. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Tricia. Any comments or questions for Tricia at this point? Okay, seeing none, we'll turn to City Engineer Scott Connors for introduction on the engineering perspective.
Yeah, so from an engineering perspective, this is a site condominium, but it's going to look just like a plat. When you drive through it, people aren't going to see the difference between a site condo and a plat. It's going to have public roads and sidewalk and drainage in the backyards and storm sewer and all those kinds of things. So I think it's important to point that out. And if it moves forward, there are other steps for us to move forward with on a staff level to make sure that we're reviewing the plans for the road and going through that kind of a process too. So, but I think these guys have got that figured out now that we're in our fourth phase. So there's some considerable wetland fill in this phase. We want to make sure that the permit number from Eagle is on the plans and that the appropriate proposed contours are shown so that it's very clear what's being filled and what isn't. We've had trouble in the past with making sure that extra fill doesn't go in some of those areas, so it's important to get it shown clearly on the plan. Tricia mentioned that building on lot number 66 is going to be challenging, so I won't reiterate that too much. Backyard drainage in lots 48 through 53 kind of wanders a little bit. We would typically have that go right down the back property line or down the center of an easement, and here it kind of follows a natural contour, which means it goes up into those lots, and that's going to be a lot harder to preserve when you dig basements, push dirt back, and regrade those lots. You know, we'd prefer to see something a little bit more cemented in there in terms of the grades so that they could be certified later and that the drainage will work in those backyards. The existing storm sewer in lots 67 and 68, that's where the outlet is for the phase from the north or from the east on the top of your picture. We want to make sure that that's removed when the new storm sewer is built in Stratford Lane there. We don't want to leave that behind because somebody might hit it and not know what it is someday. So rather than abandon it, that should be just taken right out. Between lots 62 and 63, there is a piece of public storm sewer. We want to make sure that's in a public storm easement, not in a private easement. Lots 57 through 65 and then 76 to 81. There's a low area behind those. So those areas really rely on one single pipe for the water in the backyards to get away. And typically, mostly through the Kent County Drain Office, but you know, traditionally around West Michigan, if there's a spot like that, we want to see an overland spillway so that if that pipe gets plugged, which you'd say, well, that stuff never happens, but you know, every one of these backyards is going to have kids at some time with basketballs and kickballs and all that stuff, and it happens a lot. So we want to make sure that if that gets plugged, that you don't end up with 5 or 6 flooded houses. We want to make sure there's a way for that water to get through there safely, and that those homes are all up at a safe level. Similar to that comment, the MBOs for 53 and 56 seem like they're a little bit low. There is a little bit of an overland spillway to the west there, but there is not much difference between what I could tell from the contours and the minimum building openings. So again, we want them to take another look at that and make sure that there's at least 1 extra foot there so that if the water spills out of that area, it doesn't spill into those basements. On sheet C102, there's a note for a gravel pathway. As Tricia noted, there's several pathways that were supposed to be built in phase 2 that haven't been built. Those were intended to be concrete. They're not intended to be gravel. Part of the difficulty with this one between 55 and 56 is that sometimes when there's a public utility, Grand Rapids will require a 10-foot gravel path to be put underneath the topsoil so that when you drive across it to service these lines, you don't fall in 12 inches into some soft material. So they do need to have that, but I think as far as a walking surface for these public open spaces, we don't accept gravel. Gravel creates dust, it erodes, not something we want to see. And then lastly, in phase 2, we talked about the need for a traffic impact study. I think that largely came from a lot of residents' public comments that came in and said, why haven't you done a traffic study? And the Planning Commission listened, as they always do, and said, you've got a good point there. We should get a traffic study. And so we've kind of been dragging our feet a little bit on that, I think, to this point. But we're closing in on the halfway point through the project now. With the 3rd phase, actually the 4th phase. So we followed through at staff level to make sure that that study is done. What the study shows, the study doesn't, I don't believe, include the first phases that have already been built. It just looks at from today on, but it still does trigger the potential for a traffic signal at the build-out point. And these traffic studies are a little bit difficult sometimes because it's hard to look at them from a purely scientific standpoint, because if you did, there'd be a trigger point, and at that trigger point, the developer would be responsible for improvements. And that's not realistic, because it might be the difference between one house or one trip that might do that, I think. But if you look at this from a common sense perspective, you know, we've been looking at this intersection and this development for quite some time. And so for our perspective, we put a recommendation together for the city manager's office to consider looking at 1/4 of the cost of the traffic signal, which would be one leg. That doesn't cover any of the improvements that need to happen first. That just looks at the traffic signal, but it's a pretty good starting point or a compromise. I think if we were to tell the manager's office that we think they should build the turn lane in Richmond and all the drainage that goes along with that, it would be way more than that. So it's a concession in some ways, but it provides a little bit of a seed for that intersection improvement. And I think before the signal goes in, you're going to see what we always call geometric improvements, which is turn lanes, probably in every direction, because I think that's more important than getting the signal in. And then in order for the signal to operate properly, you really need a wider intersection that has all those movements available. So we can answer questions about that, but really those recommendations are to the manager's office because they negotiate those development agreements. But I do think it's important for the Planning Commission to provide some comment, because from what I understand, the managers are looking to you folks for some input on that.
Thanks, Scott. Questions, comments? With regard to the traffic analysis that's been done, it looks like it's approaching that tipping point. And so I believe what you're suggesting is a reasonable consideration at this point. Again, this would be a recommendation of the City Commission to work with the developer to come up with agreement on how that would be addressed proportionate to the impact of this particular development. Commissioners, I don't know if others have any comments on that. There'll be a time. I thought it was right now. Sorry. No, it's just shortly. We'll let you know. Thank you. Okay.
I agree that we need to have a traffic study to be done based on this phase 4, or actually phase 3 of section of it, and to take into account the rest of the phases that are in the future, as well as across the street, that whole development over there too. So I agree that traffic study. I've driven past that intersection many times, and it's not wide enough to do left turns and right turns, and it's very dangerous. As we know, we've had many accidents there. So I agree we should have another traffic study done.
Now,
I agree with that too.
Yeah, in this case, the study is part of this, what's been submitted to us, and it's the basis of the recommendation to look for a proportionate share of the cost of improvements as a result of that analysis. As we deliberate this going forward for action this evening, that's probably one thing to keep in mind as we offer a motion on it. If there's no other questions or comments for Scott, then we'll give an opportunity for the developer to make a presentation, and at that point, then after that, we'll open the public hearing. So please come forward, name and address, please.
Good evening, I'm Paul Henderson with Roosien and Associates. Can you push the button on the, there you go, thank you. Paul Henderson with Roosien and Associates, 5055 Plainfield Avenue, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Tricia and Scott have both done a great, very detailed job of laying out the project, so I don't think I need to reiterate most of that. I would like to talk about some of the points that Tricia had brought up from a planning perspective that maybe I can clarify for the board. As far as the access paths to the open space, Ken is actively involved in building the one home between lots 29 and 30. So he didn't really want to put the sidewalk into the open space until that home is built and the lot is graded. So as soon as that home is completed, he'll complete the concrete sidewalk to the open space area. And then the other open space access, it does say gravel access drive, but as Scott pointed out, that's something that the City of Grand Rapids Sewer Maintenance Department requires, and that is something that's under the surface. It's just a structural component, so if they need to get a truck up to that manhole to perform any maintenance, the soils will have the structural stability to hold the truck. So you won't even see the path, but they know it's there. They put signs, sanitary sewer at the manhole, so their crews know where that is. So that'll just be topsoil over top of that. The plan does call, Tricia, on sheet C103, I think it calls that out, but that'll be a sidewalk on top of that as well. So that'll be a paved sidewalk to the open space. So we'll have 2 paved access areas for the community to use that open space. And then in regards to the setbacks, some being 30, some being 35, that wasn't specifically addressed on the submittal, but the tight lots like 67 through 68, I would say would be the only ones where that would be advantageous as far as developing those 3 units for building sites. If you could pan down a little, there were a couple other tight ones on phase 1. Unit 7 and 8 were both tight as well, and I believe those are similar areas where some leeway was given on the front yard setback to help with the buildability of those units. So it's a similar kind of situation for the 3 lots in question. So I would say those would be the only 3 that we would request the 30-foot setback rather than a 35-foot. If that makes sense. As far as Scott's comments are concerned, we're happy to work with him. I think we can successfully resolve all the drainage and stormwater issues that he noted in his report, so I don't think that'll be a problem. We'd appreciate the chance to work that out with him subsequent to this. I don't know if all the board members are familiar, but there is like Tricia pointed out, there has been a traffic study done already. And that compares the current day load to the final build-out load in 2031. We projected 10 years to finish the next 3 phases. So that study did indicate that at full build-out that there would be a warrant for geometric and signalization improvements at that intersection. So that's something that will need to be done at that point. We didn't ask the traffic engineer to break it down into phases specifically, but he did, and I sent an email to Scott and Tricia that with phase 3, with the projected traffic generated by phase 3, there wouldn't be any geometric or traffic signal warrants for improvements at that intersection. So that's my main thing. I don't know if Ken wants to say anything, but if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant at this point? Okay. At this point, excuse me, entertain a request for to open a public hearing.
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing. Support.
Motion by Tyler, supported by Steve, to open the public hearing. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
3 minutes.
Yes, this is your opportunity, gentleman in the back, for public comment. As you come forward, if you could please give us your name and address and share with us your comment. And we allow basically 3 minutes, up to 3 minutes for commentary. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is David Anderson. I'm here with my mother, who is a resident over on Jason Ridge Lane, Southwest, of course. My prior job experience was in architecture and engineering for over 30 years.
Sir, you were
Pardon?
talking, we're looking at the Cambridge development right now. Jason Ridge is going to be the second.
Oh, that's not this year yet.
Correct.
Oh, then I may be excused. Okay, sorry, guys.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Is there anyone else that has a comment with regard to the Cambridge project? Okay,
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Support.
motion by Tyler, supported by Steve to close the public hearing. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Commissioners, we've got recommendations from Tricia as well as Scott. Based upon some of the comments there, I don't know if there are any modifications to the proposed conditions, Tricia or Scott? Or as it's stated, does it go forward?
We've been looking at this one for a long time, the phases coming in and out and the traffic studies, and I think we're at the turning point for the traffic. That this may be built, but from then on, something is going to have to give, and I don't know if it's Walker or MDOT that gives for the next phase. I think it's important what Scott put in his recommendations about an escrow and stuff. This does present some issues, 66, 67, and 68. That's going to be a hard build right there, but that's up to the developers to figure that stuff out too. So I think, from my perspective, this is ready to move on.
I just have one added condition, and it's that specification of units 66 through 68 being permitted to have a 30-foot setback instead of a 35-foot setback.
So that was a point you raised, and they offered specifics, and put that into the motion then, okay?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for just some commentary, I generally agree. I think we're ready for it, but the intersection's going to be the big thing, right? Like the traffic study makes sense that the phase 3 doesn't necessarily preclude that we need to make that improvement, but what the traffic study is not taking into account is the safety issues that we've, I guess, generally seen. That's just on counts, right? So that's where we have other considerations that we have to take into account as this board. But again, in a general sense, I think we've come to kind of a reasonable conclusion on it, and I feel pretty good about what we've got in our reports here.
Okay. Any other comments? Are we ready for a motion then?
Yeah, I can do this one. All right, I will make a motion to forward a favorable recommendation to the City Commission for the approval of final area site plan and approval for Phase 3 of the Cambridge Grove site condominium project consisting of units 48 through 72 located at 1792 Kennewa Avenue Northwest, and in accordance with the latest plan revision dated 8/20/2021, subject to the following conditions, and this is for case 21-010. Conditions of Phase 3 final area site plan approval. The applicant shall work with the city engineer to address items outlined in his 9/8/2021 report. The applicant shall submit a draft of the required master deed amendment for the city attorney's review prior to recording. A copy of the recorded version of the master deed amendment shall be supplied to the city prior to the issuance of any building permits in Phase 3. The applicant shall work with the city manager's department to determine whether a development agreement will be necessary to guarantee that off-site roadway and intersection improvements will be funded in part by the developer. The applicant shall submit a tree escrow check to the city of Walker in the amount of $12,150 prior to the issuance of any building permits for Phase 3. The applicant shall submit a set of individual lot grading sheets consistent with the approved grading plan and MBO table prior to the issuance of any building permits. The applicant shall satisfy all previous phase obligations as indicated above prior to the issuance of any building permits for Phase 3. The applicant shall revise plans to address other items as listed above prior to the issuance of any building permits for Phase 3. The applicant shall submit 3 sets of sealed revised drawings that reflect the incorporation of all the above conditions prior to the issuance of any building permits for phase 3. And the units 66 through 68 will be permitted with 30-foot setbacks instead of 35-foot.
Support.
Okay, we have a motion by Steve, supported by Tyler, to approve with conditions as outlined here. If there's no other questions, we'll put it to vote. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. All right, the second public hearing, case number 21-024. This is, again, it's a public hearing. It's a final area site plan review and a preliminary area site plan update regarding the Jason Ridge development. Tricia will introduce the comments on that and clarify some changes that have taken place in terms of the name of the development as we go forward.
Thanks, Terry. So tonight we have Jason Ridge West, which was formerly known as what would have been Jason Ridge Phase 3. Jason Ridge Condos Phase 3. And property overview and request. So the action requested by the Planning Commission tonight is to review the final area site plan for units 1 through 29 of Jason Ridge West condominium development, and the preliminary area site plan update, and to grant approval with or without conditions, tabling or denial of the request. So again, this is a final area site plan review and a preliminary area site plan update. I call it an update instead of an amendment because it's sort of what they are asking for is sort of an accumulation of several minor modifications that would otherwise be approvable administratively. And we would just like to see all of these items reflected in a new PASP or an updated PASP, which also will establish standards for future phases going forward. So the property address is 71 Sunset Hills Northwest. That's the parent parcel. And this piece is 14.5 acres. It's zoned RPUD 1. And this future land use designation for this area is residential growth, 2 to 4 units per acre, and it's in the South Walker neighborhood cluster. And the general location of the project site is on the east side of Sunset Hills off Jason Ridge Drive Northwest. And tonight we have Jeff Clausen of Jason Ridge Investors, and we have Chuck Hoyt of Nederve, and we also have Howie Hewer, also of Jason Ridge Investors. So just a little bit of a history with this project. So the original PASP was approved along with phase 1 of the condominium development was approved in 1999, back when our city manager Daryl Schmalzell was the city planner. And so at that time it was proposed as 104 total units, and as part of phase 1 there were 28 units proposed, and there was a plan for 5 phases of this condo development. And all the units were proposed as duplex units, and the density was proposed at 3.2 units per acre. Then in 2003, phase 2 came along, but there were some remaining units that had not been built yet, and so there was a change in the phasing lines, and then what they did was they incorporated the unbuilt units from phase 1 into part of phase 2, giving it a total of 42 units. And then back in 2018, my predecessor, Dan Power, approved some administrative, some minor modifications to the PASP, where a change of unit types and duplex to standalone unit types was made, and the location of some of the units, they had to be shifted. And so there was also a change to the unbuilt unit numbers to account for the elimination of some of the duplex units. And so the applicant provided some documentation about from when that whole thing went in front of the Planning Commission, just as a courtesy, like, hey, here's a heads up, we're looking at this administratively, and that was back in 2018. And then Valley Site Farms, which is the neighboring residential plat to the south, well, southwest, that was originally developed as a plat called Jason Ridge Estates. And then it became Valley Site Farms. And so the requirement to create an additional connection to this condominium development was made at the time of phase 3, or phase 2 for Jason Ridge condos. So I have a little blurb in my staff report from that, those meeting minutes that basically indicates that, you know, it wasn't necessary at the time that phase 2 was being constructed, but when the next phase was to be going through the review process, then it would be necessary, given the number of units and trips in and out of the development, for safety purposes, having that additional connection would be necessary. And so, again, just going back to why we're asking for this PASP update, there's a lot of things associated with this particular phase. It's not super common. We don't see this this sort of lag of time between phases within the same condominium development, and then seeing a new developer in the picture. Every once in a while we do, but not often. So in this case, there's a new developer in the picture. This would be the third developer for this condo development. And because of the amount of time that has lagged between when the master deed was first recorded and having no action on phases 3 through 5 of the development, I think it's sort of, you have to start from scratch with that next phase. And so this next phase, given a different name, Jason Ridge West versus Jason Ridge Condos Phase 3, this would actually be phase 1 of Jason Ridge West. The association for the condo co-owners would be a standalone association separate from the one that is in existence now for the first 2 phases of Jason Ridge condos. And so another reason why we want to see a PASP, and I already went through some of this, but we want to see some minimum standards for when phases 2 and 3 for Jason Ridge West are under review. And we want the developer to be able to have a PASP to reference and see which items they are required to include in their FASP application. The minimum standards for future phases for a lot of things like landscaping, minimum distance to the pavement of the private road, distance between units, that kind of stuff. There wasn't a lot of that really laid out in the PASP that was approved in 1999. And so we'd just like to see a refresher so that they've got something to go on for the future phases. And so again, there's been a lot of minor modifications to the PASP over the years. But we haven't seen an actual new document come across incorporating all of those changes. We've seen FASP documents, and, I've racked my brain trying to wrap my head around some of the changes that were happening, especially when building permits were coming in for some of the remaining units in phase 2, and just trying to figure out like what unit is this and which approval is this associated with. So we just want to kind of have them get all of their ducks in a row for moving forward and getting a fresh start for this new phase. So this next phase, or this new Jason Ridge West, proposes additional changes to unit types and locations that's not consistent with the original PUD. So the original PASP, I should say, again, called for all duplex units, and so this is just another one of those minor modifications with the unit types, which we are okay with. So I've kind of gone through most of this stuff, but one thing that some of you are probably wondering about, especially people that have come to attend the public hearing, is that with these standalone condo associations and with a new developer in the picture, the legalities of being able to do all that comes straight out of the Condo Act. And it's not necessarily my gig to interpret the Condo Act. That's why we have the city attorney. But my first question when this was first proposed was probably the same question that you all have, which is, how is this going to work when we have shared open space and amenities and roads and stormwater management facilities? And so these will end up being private agreements between the two associations. The city's not necessarily involved in those agreements. Some of this will be incorporated into a master deed amendment, but the legalities with the agreements surrounding the shared amenities will be between the two associations. But we would like to have, we would like to get our attorney's eyes on those agreements to make sure that, there's language that holds the city harmless and, anything that would, we would just want to make sure that the city has no liability in what's in those agreements. So one of the big things that historically I spoke about earlier with this connection to Valley Site Farms. So this is the time where this connection is gonna it's gonna have to be activated, if you will, because it's already built. It's already been constructed. I don't know if it's been constructed completely. I think it still needs curb or something like that. Scott will probably be able to talk about that in more detail. But it's currently under the ownership of the city of Walker. And so we've reached out to our attorney to have them advise us on how the property will be conveyed to the associations. So obviously it's going to be a shared, it's going to be another shared item between the two associations in terms of maintenance. But the conveyance should occur through a warranty deed, and our attorney suggests that also through a development agreement, and we'd like to add that as a condition of approval. I corresponded with our attorney today on this, and so that's why you don't see this in my report. But I thought it was important to get it into the record that they do recommend a development agreement, which they'll draft, and then parties involved will have a chance to read over as in draft form before it's finalized. So just going back to some of these items that that we want to have on the PASP update for going forward in the future. So for when future phases come in, they know what the minimum requirements are. And this list over here on the left is a list that you probably remember seeing from presentations that I gave for the Waterford development. Because sometimes there's kind of it's hard to grasp some of all these acronyms and what's associated with each ones. And so, you know, we got a lot of questions like, oh, this is already a done deal. These things are set in stone. This is, you know, and so the difference is I've spent some time going through the differences between the PASP and the FASP for some other developments that have come through to the Planning Commission. And so I just kind of want to reiterate some of these items that are sort of locked in with a PASP approval. And in this case, it would be the PASP update. These items would be the number of units and the density. In this case, it would be the overall density of the whole development, the general street layout and any connections to those streets, signage that goes above and beyond what the sign ordinance allows. I don't know if there's going to be any signage for this. You guys say no. Any off-site improvements or development agreements, zoning districts, setbacks and minimum building heights, sidewalks and pedestrian pathways, any clearing limits or conservation areas, and then recreational amenities and what the planned uses are for those recreational amenities. So those are the things that sort of get locked in as part of the PASP when that gets approved. So in this case, we would like to see some minimum standards established because they never really were. I shouldn't say all of them, but when you look at that original PASP, it shows the dimensional requirements for the SA district from before it was rezoned to RPUD 1. Well, those setbacks aren't really all that useful because that's that zoning district was prior to the rezone. So we would like to see on this PASP, and some of these things have been added to the plan. So we're looking at needing landscaping requirements and buffer zones. You know, there in the FASP that has been provided to us, that plan sheet, there has been several places where landscaping is added to the plan. But again, when we look at the PASP or the PASP update that was provided, that stuff is not on there. And so we need notes indicating, you know, whether or not there's a requirement for one canopy tree or one ornamental tree per unit or per building. And we also want to see some uses associated with the open spaces. Again, some of that content is shown on the FASP, but we'll need to see that on the PASP update. If there's any tree clearing limits, I don't think it's been identified which would be phase 2 and which one would be phase 3. But if you're looking at the westernmost end of this development, there's a lot of old growth vegetation. So if any of that is planned on being saved, which I hope it is because most of you know I'm a tree hugger, it should be indicated on the plan so that we can sort of lock that in. Minimum parking requirements. There's been some parking calculations provided, which we appreciate. We did ask for that. But we want to know what's the minimum per unit so that we know how many guest or visitor spaces are going to be required when the future phases come in for approval. Minimum setback requirements across the board, distance between units, minimum distance from the unit to the structure to the pavement, and in some cases to the sidewalk, because some of the units have sidewalk in front of them, some don't, because sidewalk is proposed on one side of the road. And then some density was provided, but I think we need a little bit more work. I don't know if the Planning Commission has had a chance to really take a look at that density table, but there's just a few discrepancies that I would like to see addressed, and I'll get into that in a minute. And then unit layout and building types. How many duplex units there will be in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and what that unit layout would look like. So I've talked enough about the PASP update. I just have a few comments for the FASP that they are applying for approval for tonight. And that would be, one of them is the acreage discrepancy in the density table, or the, it's the density table. So there's total acres indicated on the plan at, I want to say 15 acres, or 14.9 acres, and then I've got 15 acres as the acreage that shows on the county map. So a half acre is, while that doesn't seem like a whole lot, we need to take that into consideration, because it's important to understand that the density calculation from the get-go on this development was using gross density versus practical density. And so some of you might remember from our master plan discussions, and when you saw the new master plan documents come through last fall, that going forward, we should be using this practical density, which takes into account any roads, infrastructure, wetlands, easements, any unbuildable areas. Subtract that from the total acreage of the parent parcel, so that acreage isn't used to calculate the density. But because it's been calculated under gross density from day one with this development, I've found, we're okay with how it's been calculated this time around, but we want to make sure that that half acre gets accounted for, because it is done as gross density. We have been provided an MBO table from the applicant. We would just like an indication of what kind of units they are, if they're all daylight or walkout units, or is there a mixture of both. We'd like to have that indicated on the plan. And then just the master deed amendment. So before anything gets recorded, we would like to have our attorney take a look at the amendments that are proposed to the master deed before they get recorded and before we can issue building permits. So we've gone round and round with the applicant, and we finally got to the point where, yes, let's go to the Planning Commission and get some input. But as far as the PASP update in particular being ready for an approval, I'm going to let the Planning Commission decide whether or not that would be appropriate tonight. It would be my recommendation to to table the item until some of these other items that I noted earlier can be added to the plan or revised. But if the planning commission is inclined to offer a motion to approve, I've given you a model motion to take that direction as well. So you have a model motion for tabling and for approval with conditions. And that is all I have.
Okay, thank you, Tricia. Any comments, questions?
I have kind of a cute story about the Inglesmans. I live close by them, and Ted ended up being a very close friend of mine, and was raised a very, very fine family here, and they're good citizens. But he lived across the street. The family grew up in a big house across the street, and John Whitcomb owned this land, right? Did you know that? Whitcomb Furniture Factory down. And John Whitcomb, this was a hobby farm, and Ted was his hired man and took care of that, and eventually bought him out. And he told the story, I'm sorry about these stories, but I think they're kind of something you'll probably walk out of here with. But he told me, he and I are pretty good buddies, and he took care of, I ended up with a farm, they had an orchard on it, which I didn't know, and he ended up taking care of it. So he was a good storyteller. If you know Ted, he was a good storyteller. And he told about John Whitcomb would come home at night to the farm and watch him milk the cows. And little did he know that his wife was an alcoholic or something. He's trying to get away from his wife, so he watches Ted milk the cows every night. So anyway, this is this land goes back for a long time. I'm sorry for.
Do these guys know you're telling this story? They will now, I guess.
Question for Tricia. On your figure 9 in your notes for the 2021 PUD amendment under Jason Ridge West, the new one we're talking about, the original phase 3 said 3.8. This one's 4.5 now. Is that?
So this is the table that was taken right from the plan. And I knew this would come up, and I assured the applicant that we are looking at overall density for the PUD. So, you know, when you're taking, it does look tight, but it's being calculated as gross density. So you're not taking any of the acreage of the streets or easements or anything like that out. That's all included.
I see the overall still 3. I just was the 4.5 for this new one. I just wondered.
Yeah,
Right.
with the changes that were made back in 2018, with the change from some of the duplex units to single units, that reduced the overall number of units. And so when you look at overall density of the entire PUD, it's actually gone down just slightly. I hope that sounds correct.
Any other comments, questions for Tricia? Okay, thanks, Tricia. Turn it over to Scott Connors, city engineer.
So my comments will really be kind of focused on the site plan. I do have a lot of institutional knowledge out here in the history of this, so if I can help with that, I'll certainly do that. I did get chased by one of Mr. Englesman's cows one time when I was looking for a manhole, so I understand the issues, and I did enjoy it.
Was that a ball?
No, but there was an electric fence. I had to make some calculated decisions. So regarding the site plan, the driveways for these condos, we typically want to see that they're no shorter than 25 feet so that you can park a good-sized vehicle there and still get around it safely. A couple of these are shorter than that. What I noticed after looking a little closer is I think it's the side of the street that has the sidewalk added to it now. That wasn't in there during our first site plan review. It was added. They probably didn't move the buildings back. So that might be a discretionary thing for you to look at if there's less than 25 feet, but there's a sidewalk for them to safely walk around the back of the vehicle. That might change things. I'll leave that in your court. Similarly, the parking areas that are along sections of sidewalk should be pushed back 5 feet so that they're not parking on top of that sidewalk, so they've got plenty of room. It's important to point out that within this development, the roads would be private, and they would be owned by the association. So they're not designed to public standards, they're not inspected, none of that takes place, the street lighting's all private. But one note that I didn't write in here, and I should add, should be kind of self-evident, is that we want to make sure that there's a cross-access easement on the road itself through here, like there was in Phase 1, because the Phase 1 people need to have the right to use the Phase 2 road for the redundancy to be able to get out when they're working on a road resurfacing project, or if they've got a water main break or something like that. The whole idea is that you can get out the back if you need to, and that's what that cross-access is for. So we have to make sure that's preserved. There are some hydrants that are shown very, very close to the sidewalk. We'd recommend those are at least 2 feet off the sidewalk. There's some backyard drainage that's a little bit of a concern between lots 20 and 25. It's a little bit flat. So typically what we want to see are some spot grades there to make sure that, first of all, there's a good design, but then secondly, when it's built, there's elevations to follow and then to confirm later. Also, the drainage behind the building 1516, it's a double unit, needs to be delineated a little bit more. We want to make sure that there's grades around future lots 53 and 54. And what that does is that area carries some concentrated flow from the east, and it's important that they convey that safely through their site so that it doesn't then flow into the Platte to the south. We want to make sure those are protected from this water, and that this water is taken care of inside of this development. There's going to be some grades that are needed on the sidewalk to the passive open space. Similarly here, we want to make sure it's not put too high so that it blocks water and then impedes those minimum building openings for the lots that are around that open space. And the stormwater detention here was originally intended to be shared with the pond to the east. That's one thing that we have not checked, but it is up to this developer to confirm that as part of the stormwater permit. We want to make sure that they actually have the right to do that. We do know that they have the right to have cross-access on the private road in Phase 1, but we don't know if they have written authorization to share in that pond. So they need to confirm that, and then also they need to inspect and maintain that pond. It's pretty safe to say most of the time when we bring that recommendation up, it's because they've never ever been inspected and never been maintained. So it's important to get that done. And then the last item is with that cross access to Giel Avenue. That was intended to allow for the development of the remaining parts of this Jason Ridge condos. That outlet is really there for the condo folks to get to the public road system and not vice versa. So we want to make sure that it's opened up and ready for use. The kicker there is because there wasn't a condo association for Phase 2 at the time when Vista or Valley View sites came in, that property was transferred from that property owner to the city because they didn't have anybody else to give it to. So it's not public right of way, but it's considered publicly owned private property right now. And Dan Power had a really nice path forward on that so that when we got to this day, here are the things you need to do. And I think that's been passed on to our city attorney, so they should be able to convey that and make sure that it's cleaned up and then becomes part of the maintenance responsibility for Jason Ridge West and not the city or not either the adjacent property owners, because again, it's there for the condos. That's it for us.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Any comments, questions, Pat?
Scott, I see there's an oil well up there in that new section, and that's like the second one. There's another one on the other lane, on the other street. Is that still active? I mean, is there anything that can that be like screened in or fenced in? I mean, is that?
Well, they have to maintain access for the operator of the well, and the minute you ask one of those guys if their well is inactive, they'll flip the switch and turn it back on again because they want to preserve those rights. Sure. So I think the safe answer is, yeah, that's still relatively active.
Additional comment, there's a whole lot of oil wells and a lot of oil tanks around there too, and I don't know how close you can build a house to those. What, is there rules regarding that?
The rules are regarding the wells. So in a case like this where you've got public water and sewer, it's not as big a deal. I think it's more of a deal to the developer and who, they have to build units near that. But in terms of a buffer around it, it's basically public health safety related in terms of the water and septic, which doesn't come into play.
That and the odor from all those things too, the oil smell.
But I think that comes back into the marketing, you know, if they can build a unit next to it and sell it, then so be it.
Any other comments, questions? Any other comments or questions for Scott? At this point, we'll give the applicant an opportunity to make a presentation for this project.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Chuck Hoyt on behalf of Nederve. We also have the developers here as well, so they'll be available for some questions. And I think my screen hopefully is coming up there.
Is there a microphone? I'm trying to get my mic. He's on a ceiling light, but
I can try to speak louder too. Does that help?
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I'll really yell. Okay, so yes, thank you. And, you know, Tricia did a great job sort of breaking down the whole project. So I'll just kind of do a quick summary and then just get into some of the responses of some of the comments and questions that were brought forth. So as Tricia summarized, you know, this was an approved plan from back in 1999 that included 104 total units, all duplex units. And they were at 3.2 units per acre in density. There was a staff approval in 2017 of a revision to that plan, which ended up being 97 total units, so a few less units at a 3.0 units per acre density. The plan we show you today, our current request is 99 total units, so 2 more than what we had before, and we end up at 3.1 units per acre in density, so 0.1 less than what was originally approved. And we'll go through some of those details in our density table that I know that there's just a few questions on. So, in summary, it's a continuation of that Jason Ridge development, and it's consistent with the design intent approved in both 1999 and in 2017. So we see this as a minimal departure from any of the design concepts presented in previous versions. And your planning director has done a thorough and complete job of reviewing this plan and analyzing this PUD amendment to ensure it's both harmonious with the original design and also documented appropriately. So the new developer, JTB Homes, they're a capable and experienced builder and developer. They've navigated this PUD revision process and willingly accommodated any of the new requirements that the city has had with their new zoning ordinance. And this includes working with the city attorney to properly transfer that Gale Avenue area that certainly can be discussed further tonight and certainly after any approvals are given. So I can just jump right into some responses of some of the questions that were brought forth by the planning director. And the first one that we'll get into is the landscaping and buffering requirements. So it was requested by the planning director that we document the apologize, my file keeps getting corrupted and I am not able to. Forgive me here just a moment. Try this again. Okay, so here's the U101 sheet, which is really the updated Jason Ridge and Jason Ridge West RPUD1, the updated PASP. So again, jumping right into the landscaping and buffering requirements. We've added this table onto the sheet, so you won't see this on the submittal that we had before, but we've already gone ahead and added these landscape buffering requirements. And it takes a little bit of review back to the actual plan that I won't go through each individual one, but just understand that we are calling, and this is a clarification of something that Tricia had mentioned before, we are calling this Phase 1 of Jason Ridge West, Units 1 through 29. Phase 2 is 30 through 38, just as they're numbered sequentially, and even has it on there as Phase 2. And then Phase 3, again, sequential 48 through 58. So you can reference on this document when it gets submitted to you that we now have the buffering and screening minimums as requested by the planning director. So furthermore, with regard to landscaping, the original PASP actually had no requirements for any landscaping, as pointed out in the director's report. Had no requirements for street trees or any landscape design for any individual units. What we have done is added onto our plan a typical single unit and duplex unit landscape plan, okay? This includes a tree for each unit, and specific plantings that are typical. Now, while it shows on the print that these are kind of very specific plantings, we'd ask for a little bit of variance on them in that you don't want the same thing over and over. This is meant to be typical, but the idea being that there is a tree for each unit and these type of plantings or similar. So I guess I wanted to clarify that because you won't want the same thing over and over. Specific to street trees, you know, it's the applicant's intent to really have the foundation plantings act as the true kind of plantings for the site. And again, that's intended to be consistent with what is remaining on the rest of the site or what's developed there now. You know, because there is no parkway, even where there is sidewalks, and I'll get to a photo of that in a second. You know, the typical landscaping through the remainder of Jason Ridge is the foundation plantings, which looks very nice. And so again, the applicant, their intent was, in order to be consistent with what was presented before, what's existing, they want to handle it the same way. I'll just quick show an image with a sidewalk. So very similar right here. You know, obviously there's a cluster of trees back in here from, you know, sort of common space, but this is your typical landscaping of this site here. So that's how the applicant intends to handle that. The notation about the westernmost project limits with the expanse of trees, we've added a note on the print that I'll just point out real quick to you here. We've provided a limit of tree preservation. We've sort of bubbled it out to ensure that all those trees remain because, you know, I think the applicant shares in Tricia's idea that we need to preserve as much as we can. The open space. Planning director mentioned that on our landscape plan, we have notations calling out the amenities in this passive open space here, but we've added a few notations on, again, the importance is this overall PASP plan. Want to have those notations on there, so we've added those on there as well. Street lighting, same thing. It wanted to get, was requested to be put onto this sheet. So we've done that with a count of 4 added street lights, identical to the street lights that have been in place at Jason Ridge already. So we've added that onto that U101 sheet as requested. The proper Library page is referenced of the Gale Avenue quitclaim deed. So that's on there as well. I won't scroll through and show you that either. Additional parking. We've added a parking table onto sheet U101 as well to sort of break down per phase the number of parking spaces and the number of spaces per unit. So sort of broken down there in front of you. So a total of 68 parking spaces for the entire site. Divided by the 99 units, we're at about 0.69 spaces per unit. Now, did we want to establish that as sort of the minimum spaces per unit? If more detail is requested by the planning director to sort of memorialize that 0.69, that's something that can be discussed. These are just the spaces that we found that would fit on the site. We felt they were appropriate, and this is how the math worked out. So it's about 0.69 parking spaces per unit, which is not far off, slightly less than it was originally. The legal descriptions, as requested by the planning director to be updated, that has been done. However, a few clarifications. It was requested that a parcel number be provided for the overall PASP. Because parcel numbers are assigned per unit, they're assigned by the city assessor per unit, there really isn't a parcel number for the overall PASP, so that wasn't provided in this, but we do have a legal description. Also on sheet C 101, a legal description is provided for all of Jason Ridge West. One point to make, though, is when you look at sheet C 101, it really has to do with just phase 1 of Jason Ridge West. So a point of clarification that legal description includes all of Jason Ridge West, not just that phase 1. So if that's any sort of issue, that can be worked out with the planning director if necessary. Grading, we've provided a minimum basement opening, and as requested, individual grading sheets can be provided with the building permit applications. But a point of clarification that I suppose can either be answered now or afterwards is, do all of the grading sheets for individual units need to be provided before any building permit is provided? Or is it that you would like individual grading sheets for each unit as they are applied for a building permit?
We would like them to be submitted as a set. So for all the units in the phase, here's the set of all the grading sheets, so that when somebody applies for a building permit, we can relate back to that grading sheet that was submitted that should be in accordance with the approved grading plan.
Okay, so a full set of all the units prior to any building permit issued for any of these units.
Yep.
Okay. The master deed amendments, that's perfectly acceptable, the requirement you have there, and I believe you even brought the check for $1,000 tonight. So if that's something that you need, we can handle that tonight as well. Okay, so I'd like to jump into the engineer's comments that I think we can address as well tonight. So yes, several of the driveways are shorter than the minimum 25 feet as typically recommended. It was our understanding that really the intent of that is to ensure that a vehicle can be parked in a driveway, but people can still walk on the sidewalk behind that vehicle and not have to sort of walk around it. And the dimensions that we have in place right now can certainly accommodate that, so we would request that the dimensions that are shown on the print now be approved as is.
I should, sorry to interrupt, but I should add that when I met with these folks, I had some comments from Daryl's staff report from way back in the day stating that the condition should be that the minimum is 22 feet. So I think on their plan it showed 23 feet. Nowadays we ask for 25 feet. So I think that might be where that shorter than 25 feet might be coming from.
Yeah, that certainly sounds familiar from our discussions. So again, we request that the 23 be approved. The parking areas should be pushed back an additional 5 feet off the road. That has been done. That is now updated on the print. That's not a problem. It did change some of the dimensions of the setbacks to the buildings, but we're still in compliance with what we note as our minimum distance from the building, which is 15 feet from structure to parking area. So we're still in compliance with that, but yet we've still pushed that 5 feet back as requested. The hydrants should be located at least 2 feet behind the sidewalk, certainly, and they will be. Honestly, it's probably a function of a blueprint. You have to sort of show a fire hydrant quite a bit larger than it actually is in real life, so it appears to be a lot closer to the sidewalk, but that's certainly an agreeable requirement of the engineer. The backyard drainage between lots 20 and 25 is relatively flat. We've actually updated the gradings of that area behind there, and we can submit that to the city engineer, so that's an agreeable requirement as well. Our engineering staff has already handled that. And same thing with the backyard drainage from lots 15 and 16. That has all been updated as well, and I'll spare you sort of zooming in on all that. Just know it's been updated, and we'll submit that to the city engineer for review. The stormwater detention, as mentioned a few minutes ago by the city engineer, there is a cross-access easement. There is a document, a legal document in place granting the approval of the entire Jason Ridge West Association to be able to use not only the roads and utilities, but that stormwater detainage area as well. And so we can certainly provide that if necessary, but it may be in your file already. I believe it might be. One thing I may have skipped over in the density table, I'm going to bounce back to that just briefly, just to clarify how that happened, Tricia. If you look on your sheet that you have right now, it's going to show 14.9 acres, and the reason for that is we got a little ahead of ourselves and we measured this area here. We measured Gale Avenue, which is about 0.3 acres. So when you click on the parcel mapping from Kent County, they're going to show 14.5 acres, which is all of Jason Ridge West. We got ahead of ourselves a little bit, included that area at 14.9, so we've actually reduced that back now. So the density table that you should see is now an overall, the Phase 3 future or Jason Ridge West acreage at 14.5, still a 32.4 overall acreage, started with a 3.2 overall density, went to 3.0 in 2017, and now today we're at 3.1. So just clearing up that mystery there of how that happened. And then finally, the cross-access to Gale Avenue, quick claim deeding, working with the city attorney, certainly something that the applicant is willing to do, and we can work through that process as necessary. So.
Well, thank you. Any questions for the applicant at this point?
Who do you market these to? Who buys these?
Your typical buyer, your typical demographic is going to be an empty nester. It's going to be.
How about coming up to
sorry,
the
absolutely, absolutely. Sorry.
name?
Do I have to hit that?
No, it's on.
Okay, cool. Jeff Clausen, Jason Ridge Investors. To answer your question, your typical marketing would be to an empty nester. It would be to a retiree. It might be to single individuals that don't wish to have a yard to care for themselves. In our typical or similar communities, we often find ourselves with younger professionals that are starting to move into condo communities because they don't want the time commitment of upkeeping their units. So it's really a multi-generational type demographic that are really looking at condo communities today.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay, any comments or questions for the applicant? Okay. At this point, entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
Make a motion. Open public hearing.
Motion by Pat, supported by Steve. Open public hearing. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Again, as you come up, please give us your name and address, and you have up to 3 minutes for sharing your comments.
I don't know what 3 minutes is, but My name is Dennis Webb. I'm a resident, new resident in the area. I used to live in Walker, but anyway, we have lot 8 in the Jason Farm, the Valley Farms thing. And I noted on the plan here where they're not indicating the changes that were done in our lot line on our lots. They put in a private easement for water drainage, so we have a like a ditch back there right in the backyard, back end of it, of which goes down to an elevation of 702, and then there's a bank going up at an elevation of 730. And so it's a rather, I don't want to say steep bank, but it's all got trees and everything growing on it. So anytime if they disturb that height of that, then all the water is going to start coming in our direction. Secondly, right now, and if I could give you, can I give you a picture? Would that be helpful? Can I approach you to give you a picture?
Yeah, I can put it on the document camera too.
It's just, this is rain Monday, so it kind of shows what's coming down here before the development even starts. So I know that the developers did not address those 2 lots as to what they intended to do with them. But like I said, these documents don't even show that easement. They look like they got some kind of planning or easement going on their property, which means another ditch or drainage area, which would then obviously be higher than the drainage ditch in which we have. So anyway, that's kind of what the whole thing is. So I can't imagine if they start developing that upper level, and the water's going to have to go this way to get a rain from the house, than the location it's at, because they brought it over the top of that ridge. And so again, mine is just really, they can build whatever they want up there, but the drainage is an issue for us. And you can see here that it's even the land to the west, I guess, everything kind of drains down there. And there's no interruption of that flow until it hits this diversion easement that was placed in there in our backyards or whatever. That's all I had to say. I just would like the concern of the Planning Commission to make sure that the water's going the other direction instead of more coming our way.
And you said that was by lot 8?
Lot 8, yeah. I'm at the end of it before it goes toward the creek. In other words, at the end of my lot, which would be the lowest point, the one to the west is the 702 elevation, at least on our drawings that we had from the lot. And then it goes down the bank down into the creek. So it all, and it ends up down there just like it would on top if it's directed that way. It's gonna,
okay,
because that's a steep embankment going down to the creek.
All right.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want your photo back?
That doesn't matter, I can bring another one.
Okay. Do you have that really modern house at the?
Yeah.
I love that house.
Oh, that house is good looking. At the end? I was out there today. That's really nice looking.
Thank you.
I agree, yeah.
All right.
As long as I don't have a swimming pool in the back.
Any other public comments that want to be offered? Sure.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jim Graber. I am a resident of Jason Ridge Condos, 3623 Jason Ridge Lane. And one of the things I'd really like to put to everybody is the concern that's brought a lot of our neighbors out today is the concept of a separate standalone association. I'm not sure why that's a good idea, but being a resident of the current condos, we're going to be asked to share our privately owned, privately maintained roads with this new development. I know one of the stipulations is that the developer or the new association is going to be expected to enter into negotiations to reach a settlement through good faith negotiations. My wife, the lady in the red hair here, is the outgoing president of our association, and I can tell you to this day, no one has contacted the current association. So if we're supposed to find an agreement through good faith bargaining, I don't think we're off to a good start. I just might add that until that sort of situation is at least begun, maybe tabling this until it has at least been initiated might be a real good idea. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Joan Keith, 137 Ida Red Lane, Southwest. I have a question, maybe it was for the applicant. What is the timeline for beginning and concluding phase 1, 2, and 3?
Well, do you want me to answer that question? Or do you want me to answer all?
We're going to, at the end, we'll ask you to answer the questions. Okay. Anyone else?
My name is Nick Koning. I live in Jason Ridge Condos, 3647 Jason Ridge Lane. I have basically two comments. The proposal by the applicant is a separate condo association. Don't understand why. The second question is more from the Planning Commission. Comment again. Agreements pertaining to shared use of roads, common elements, and stormwater management facilities. Have not seen anything in regards to that. And until I read Tricia's notes for this meeting, didn't even know that was part of something we should be concerned with. So thank you for letting me know.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Sir, in the back, you had previously expressed a desire to speak?
Yeah.
If you could come to the, sir, if you could come to the podium, please. Thank you.
The unit density per acre, he had said it was decreased, if I understand correctly. So overall, in layman's terms, that means less condominiums per that acreage of the overall development. Because my mother's concern was basically, when you look at phase 1, relative to where they live on, well, she's at 3773, and if you measure the setback between the units, it seemed to vary between 30 and 35 feet, and I was wondering why there wouldn't be more of a consistent dimension per that setback of each lot. I used to do architecture and engineering for a living for 30 years, so I'm well versed in how to interpret the drawings, and that was one of the things that caught my eye, was it didn't seem to be a typical dimension for those units, because it seems like they're too crammed in, put it that way. You know, and I think the overall concept of Jason Ridge was to have a little bit of an open feeling, some airiness there, and not just seem like some urban development where you're bunched in together. And I think because of the fact too that you are in the city of Walker, you don't want your resident, your neighbor 10 feet away from you are now. When they built the unit to the east of my mom's, we were very concerned about Blahnik going over the property line, and never really did get a variation or a verification on where that line was. And so as I see these future units being developed, I like the fact that there's a little bit more space between them, which I would hope that the council or city of Walker would take into consideration. Thank you much.
Thank you. Someone in the back? If you can come forward, please.
Hello, my name is Mary Jo Zarnecki, and I'm a resident of Jason Ridge Condominiums also. I live at 76 Jason Ridge Court. I guess one of the concerns that all of us have is we know that we've been slow moving as far as completing our whole Jason Ridge area. But with this new developer coming in, I guess we would feel better about it, and I'm sure he'd like to have good feelings between all of this. If he were to maybe get with our board or something and let us know a little bit what's going on, it would be a little easier to accept. And like we say, we don't really understand why they want a completely different board. I know when ours started, the actual developer was the board until there were a certain amount of condos developed, and before you could actually start a board of your own. So, I mean, we're talking a lot of time here. I think communication's the most important thing to keep people, you know, we can all guess what's going to happen, and maybe those things aren't going to happen. Where if we could talk about it, we've been there a while, maybe we'd have some ideas to throw out to him. I just think it would make things much easier. Now, I don't know if that necessarily is something that should have been brought up with the rules and regulations of this going on, but I know that's the concern of the people who live there now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Hear a motion to close the public hearing? Or ma'am? Okay, sorry.
I just said maybe really off the wall. I'm Lori Anderson, and I reside at 3773. I moved back from Chicago in 2012, and it was a really peaceful place for me to reside. And I just would hope in all of this, there's a small section of the apple trees. I would love to see some of those preserved, and some of Inglesma's tradition and heritage preserved left. That's all I got to say.
Okay, thank you.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion by Tyler.
Support.
Supported by Pat to close the public hearing. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Tricia, with regard, the question that keeps on coming up as far as why a separate condo association. Can you give a pretty succinct answer to that?
I can try. The Condo Act is really long, and there's a lot of complicated language in it. And so, like I said earlier, I can read the Condo Act and I can take pieces out of it that apply to what's required for your review, for the local unit of government's review of a site condo, or I'm sorry, a condominium or site condominium. But my understanding, and this is the way I read it, and you might have a better understanding, and feel free to chime in. But after the first master deed has been recorded, if there is 6 or more years that goes by without the development of or an application to have reviewed a subsequent phase, then I believe the original developer has the right to transfer those development rights to another developer. And Jeff, if you want to pipe in here anytime, I'd be happy to hear your interpretation.
I'll try to add a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm not an attorney either. I don't try to play one. So Michigan Condo Act, as you correctly stated, gives you 6 years typically in which to expand to a future phase of a project. If you don't during that period of time to then develop that future phase, you have to do that legally per the Condo Act with a different developer and association. So it doesn't technically have to be a different developer, but it does have to be a different association. And that is why under this scenario, we're coming as Jason Ridge West. That is the explanation.
That's the way I understand it as well.
That's my understanding as well. And so it's a case where it's not the developer's choice to go to a altogether new association. It's a state law that specifies that. And what's happened here is, you remember a number of years back when the housing went down and completely stopped for a period of time, something we've never seen in our history. And this is a byproduct of it. I think when this Condo Act was enacted, there was no anticipation that this would ever happen, but it did, and they're just following what the state law is requiring. And what's described in the conversation this evening and how the developer is proposing this is that they recognize that they've got to work together. They have to work with the existing association and work with the other one. Now, whether or not those conversations have taken place yet, there's been comments that perhaps not, but bear in mind that this action right here is a recommendation from the Planning Commission to the City Commission on this particular project. And it recognizes as well in terms of Tricia's description of it is that the city doesn't have a role in requiring and mediating between those two associations working together. That's where I heard the term good faith. Good faith work has to be done in order to achieve that. And it's a case where any action that's we're recommending goes to the City Commission. Even if the City Commission in terms of approving this, if they were to approve a recommendation, there still has to be that reconciliation that takes place before you start construction on that next phase. And I think that's recognized by the developer, and you as the neighbors should expect to be working together with him on that. And I would just suggest that at the conclusion of this hearing that if you have a representation of the existing condominium association here, exchange information, and if possible, set up a time to meet very soon in order to get that conversation going. I think there's some recognition of common ground that you can reach and work through this, but again, the city is not in a position to mediate that. That may not be what the news you want to hear, but that's the fact of it in terms of the state law in place. Tricia, Scott, any other comments to that?
I seem to remember maybe a loophole, maybe I'm way off, but that if the existing association was to unanimously approve, there was an option to combine. So that might be something to look into. I might be off base, but.
Well, and perhaps checking with the city attorney to see if he could provide some perspective on that as well.
I totally agree with the attorney. Get somebody involved that can put their name on paper.
So, again, this is a recommendation going to the City Commission. You've raised your concerns, and believe me, the staff will be responsive to that, and contact with the city attorney's office, so provide some direction as far as this goes to the City Commission. Because you're going to have the same questions for them, and this is an opportunity to raise those concerns and have an opportunity to perhaps prepare for that next step.
Mr. Chair, I just want to mention that this one doesn't have to go to the City Commission. It's Planning Commission approval for the FASP.
Okay.
Whereas the other one did have to have City Commission
All
approval.
right. It was burned in my mind.
Condo versus site condo.
Okay. All right. Well, that being the case,
but everything that you mentioned still applies to this.
yeah. As we deliberate, Scott, you getting ready to say something?
No.
Okay.
Terry, before we start, can we have the developer answer the one question that came up that you said you were going to wait?
Oh, yeah. We'll come back to that now. Put this on hold. Early on, Mr. Webb, involving an existing Lot 8, raised a question about drainage, what's in place right now, what he's seeing right now. would the engineer for the applicant be able to recognize what that issue is and how that would be addressed?
I'll take a shot at it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Typically, in any development, you have to manage stormwater within your own development. And I think, Mr. Connors, you can probably definitely speak to that. So if our site is generating stormwater, then we've got to be able to control that within our own site and not impact Mr. Webb's lot. I mean, if our site's generating stormwater and it's damaging his property, then I would say that our grading plan will have to address that. You agree? Yeah.
So currently, you've got a plan that's under review for this evening.
Yep.
Question been raised whether or not it takes that into account.
That's actually in future phase, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, and we can specifically address that area as necessary if you wanted to make that a condition as well, that we review that specific area behind Lot 8 and ensure that no stormwater drainage goes into the neighbor's yard. By all means, I think that would be acceptable to the applicant as well. So we'll focus on it, and if you'd like to write that into the approval, that's what I would suggest.
I think you've already got a condition or in the report for that.
Okay, all right. So I would likewise suggest that you exchange information with Mr. Webb so that he's informed as you go forward on addressing that.
Sure.
There was a question raised about the consistency of dimension between the units. If you may.
Yeah, sure. There was the question of concern of 25 foot being too close together as our plans are showing. That's what was originally proposed, and that was what was originally approved. I will say we want to live with what was approved, which our requirement is. But if you look at a number of our condo communities that we build throughout West Michigan, our typical separation is 16 to 18 foot in a condo setting. So this is greater than that, but obviously we want to live with what the requirement is for this development.
Okay, thank you. As far as the preservation of the apple orchard, again, does this plan make provision for that?
I honestly don't know where that apple orchard is located specifically.
The east of 17 through 19.
Most likely to get that stormwater drainage through the rear yards there, that area is probably going to be graded out. It would be my guess, and Mr. Connors, you can tell me if you think otherwise, but most likely to accommodate our overall grading, that area probably is going to be impacted.
Yeah, I'd throw that right back at you guys. I don't want to be the one
No,
that's accused of
you're
killing
not
all the
designed to
apple
understand.
trees.
No, I don't want to make that your decision. I understand.
I also believe if you have apple trees, you have to maintain them. You can't just let them grow. You just can't have random apple trees that aren't pruned, trimmed, and sprayed because they're concerned about apple blight or something, but that's just what I've read.
So I think bottom line is that the way the development plans are laid out, they would not be preserved.
That's correct.
And, all right. Thank you.
Any other questions that I can address?
What's the question on phasing?
Yeah, the phasing timeline.
Oh, sure. So from a phasing or a marketing timeline, obviously everything is market dependent, as we've seen with just this development from when it started to today. Given a normal timeline that we would see in one of our typical communities, I would expect to see us move through phases 1 through 3 within 4 or 5 years, probably, and that's probably a conservative estimate, so it might be shorter than that.
Okay.
Or longer. Like I said, you just don't know what market conditions might be, but you're absolutely correct. We just don't know.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioners, a lot of conversation. Any thoughts on how we proceed from here?
Well, I guess I'll start. Mr. Hoyt talked fast and furious, answering all the questions. I'm a little concerned about if the developer hasn't talked to the existing association. I think there's a lot of loose ends here, folks, fellow commissioners, and I think they should be resolved before we give any kind of approval.
I agree with Tom. Our staff hasn't had time to review the new preliminary site plan and then compare it to the final area site plan, so I'm not even comfortable approving either. And it bothers me that there's been no communication between the current residents and the future association. And it bothers me that somebody hasn't looked into, is that absolutely necessary? Because it's just too many loose ends, and I agree with Tom.
And Scott may be correct that they could merge the two. There's a lot of loose ends here.
I am inclined to agree with the other two. I think that it would be great to have some time on this, and I'd love to see if I can't beat Jeff Sluggett to the answer on the condo issue.
You want to do what?
Dig into the condo act.
You want to beat Jeff Sluggett?
Oh, yeah.
Yourself?
Yeah. I have state law.
I don't think the city should be paying for that. I think the developer should be coming to.
I don't disagree, but does that fall into their escrow?
I have no idea.
Any
I'm
other?
not gonna argue over it.
Any other comments?
I'll just comment that I concur that there's just too much unknown at this time, and staff hasn't had a chance to adequately review the changes that have been brought forth, and I think it'd be premature to consider it tonight.
Okay. Okay. All right. As we, do we have a motion then?
I'll make a motion. Motion for case 21-024, final area site plan review and preliminary site plan update, Jason Ridge West Condominium Development, 71 Sunset Hills Avenue Northwest. I make a motion to table the final area site plan and preliminary site plan update, last revision dated 9/2/21, and supporting application material for the first phase of Jason Ridge West Condominium Development, consisting of units 1 to 29 and related site improvements for the property located at 71 Sunset Hills Avenue, based on the following findings. The Jason Ridge West PUD, as described by the final area site plan, does not continue to meet the standards required by section 94-3. Many plan elements are missing, as indicated in the planning director's report. The final area site plan is not in substantial compliance with the previously approved preliminary site plan for Jason Ridge Condos RPD. Many changes have been proposed, however, minimum standards must be established as part of the preliminary site plan update.
I have a motion. Is there support?
Support.
Scott? Any other conversation? All those in favor of tabling action indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed mean same sign. Motion carried. I think that you got an opportunity here to start the conversation, and then that'll give time for staff to review what's been submitted, and hopefully that question with regard to the separate associations can be addressed as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right. We still got a... Okay. Okay. All right. Any other business at this point?
If you're interested, Dan Power's watching right now, so you can wave and say hi, Dan.
Hi, Dan.
Did he know that we were talking about Jason Ridge West and wanted to make sure that we were doing the right thing?
Miss you, buddy.
He's just a great young man, was interested in how we're following up, so.
All right. Do we otherwise, go ahead.
Hey, we're thinking about you, Dan.
So I was just going to mention that we will not have a meeting on October 6th. We had a few items that were have applied for approval, or I can't even talk right now.
Can we have you guys leave? Can you guys go out in the hallway, please?
Tricia can yell and you can whisper.
Okay, so what was I saying? Oh, we have a couple items that we're working with the applicant and reviewing, but they're not quite ready for. One of them being the gas station, the Walker View gas station. So he's got a little bit of work to do yet. He thought he was going to be on tonight's agenda, but no. So and then we had an ordinance committee meeting earlier this week, and we sort of pitched the zoning ordinance update, and it was well received by the ordinance committee. So the next step is going to be Frank pitching it to the city commission and seeing if we can get some support there. But
that happened too. And it sounds like we're gonna, after the city's audit's done, we'll have some more serious conversation about it.
Yep. So if you're wondering what is all on that whiteboard, there's kind of a summary of what we talked about. So that's all I have.
All right.
October 20th.
I'll be gone that one.
Motion to
adjourn. Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
When's Chick-fil-A opening up?
October 2nd or something.
Is that quick?
First week of October.
I saw the umbrella.